Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video we're going to go over the newly announced Expedition lead mechanic and how it might impact the endgame in the new 3.15 expansion. So of course, GGG dropped an absolute ton of changes on the community with the announcement today. We'll go over them in future videos, nerfs, balances, reworks, the works. But in today's video, I want to focus on the brand new lead mechanic and how it might impact the endgame and what we can expect from this new mechanic. So without further ado, let's get into it. So at its core, the new lead mechanic is a map-based mechanic that has players entering maps as usual to encounter new burial sites. Now these burial sites will have a number of different chests and powerful monsters marked with these flag posts. You can see in the background here we've got some chests, we got some skulls, and those represent both monsters and rewards. Now, the player will have a number of explosive charges at their disposal, and you can plant them around the grave or burial site and then detonate them in sequence to uncover a number of chests. So if you want to compare this to anything, my best comparison would be it's a bit of a combination of the Legion pylon mechanic as well as Abyss. When you want to compare it to Abyss, you're essentially laying down your own abyssal fissure, and you get to choose which rewards it will kind of run over, how many monsters it will have, and also where it will travel, so you get a lot of agency over it. It's like Legion in the fact though that you have a big area, you can blow up a ton of chests, which are based on league rewards, you can get a bunch of monsters, and there's just a lot of action. So I would definitely compare it to those two leagues, and I think that's generally how the play will go. Now overall, I would say it's definitely on the slower paced side of things. You do obviously have to plan out where you want your charges to go, and you want to maximize your amount of loot. I imagine players are going to get fairly quick at this. I imagine we'll also be able to use the extra action button to lay down the explosive charges. If you check out the trailer, you'll be able to see that, and players will be smashing them down, kind of identifying the loot pretty quick, and you'll be able to fly through these. Now, when you're detonating the explosives though, if you take a look at the trailer, things do go a little bit slow. That is my only concern for the actual in-map lead mechanic. And when we kind of show it off here, you'll kind of get what I mean. When you set it off, there is definitely quite a large delay, and that's going to give you time, I suppose, to get ready, slay the monsters at hand, and then move on to the next pack. Overall, I would like to see a little bit of an increase in the speed here, but I can see how that it'll probably be fine. Overall, I think if you had to time it, each encounter is probably going to take around 30 or 40 seconds to complete, and as long as the rewards are very, very good, and you have a lot to get out of it, I think it's going to be well worth your time. And if Ultimatum is anything to go off, then I think the rewards should be just fine for the time commitment. It's a much faster mechanic than a full Ultimatum ever will be, and overall I think it's going to be pretty snappy and fun to plan out your explosive route. Now, of course, if they left it at just that, that would be a little bit boring. So, of course, they have introduced a way to juice up your in-map expeditions by unearthing remnants. So, remnants are special nodes, unlike chests and the rare monsters. They actually empower your loot from the remnants that you're doing. From the expeditions you're doing. So once you blow them up with explosive charges, it's going to add additional difficulty and also additional loot. Now the question I have, and I think a lot of people have, is do you have to blow these remnants up before it gets to the chest? So for example, let's say you blew up 10 chests and then a remnant. Will that remnant retroactively apply to the chests? We're not entirely sure yet. Same goes for pack size. Will that retroactively apply? Or will you have to try and kind of plan your explosive route around getting the remnants all at the start and then blowing up the rest of the loot later on? That could make for some pretty interesting gameplay, but looking at the modifiers here, you can massively augment your in-map expedition gameplay with these remnants, and they will also be playing, in my opinion, a massive role in the new aspirational content that's being added in Expedition as well. So you can see here, we've got Monster Penetration as the main one on display here. Chris Wilson has also talked about physical damage immunity as one of them. So these modifiers are fairly extreme. Penetration is definitely a very dangerous modifier as well, but the rewards certainly do make up for that. Imagine if you're popping a Legion and you have 100% increased quantity of items dropped by monsters. That is absolutely insane, and if you stack these things together, it could be completely ridiculous. Let's say you get 3 Unearthed Remnants at the start of your explosion chain, which all have 100% increased quantity. All of a sudden, you're getting 300% more loot. That's equivalent to running 4 remnants worth of actual remnants in general. Sorry, I keep calling them remnants. Expeditions, and that's definitely going to juice up your loot a lot. There is also modifiers for chest loot, which we haven't seen in the past, but now we're seeing that on the expeditions, which is quite exciting as well. So if you have a ton of chests and you're pursuing that chest kind of gameplay and you've got a bunch of chest remnants, you're definitely going to want to go for those remnants and then target all the chests you can. But if you don't have too many of the remnants which help you with chests, I imagine you'll probably want to go for the item quantity and pack size ones and then try and scoop up all the monsters possible and really try and target it that way. So there is definitely some variety in gameplay, and I can see myself as kind of a min-maxer and kind of like a currency-focused player really trying different strategies out, and I expect each expedition is going to be a little bit different just based on which remnants are available to you. So I am quite excited about that, and I think one of my main criticisms of some league mechanics such as Blight and Ultimatum is that there wasn't any variety in the in-map kind of challenges that you get, and this league already seems to have that solved, which I'm pretty excited about, and I just hope there's enough remnants to really be able to have the option to juice up your expeditions as much as you want to and really try and push your character as much as you want to, which would be really exciting. All right. Moving on. So, as part of the Expedition League, you will be acquiring new currencies. So these currencies correspond to the new 4 vendors that are getting added to the game. There's a currency for each of them, and you will be able to acquire new items with them, as well as interact with new special kind of ways to purchase items, craft items, and gamble, which is very exciting indeed. So we're going to go over all of the different vendors and talk a little bit about how they work, and then we're also going to cover the currencies in a little bit. So the first vendor up is, let's just go over to him, this guy here, this small dude. I don't actually remember his name exactly, but he is essentially a ritual style vendor. So the short guy, basically he will offer you a bunch of items and you can purchase them with currency that you drop from the new expeditions in your maps and also other endgame expedition activities. So you can use this currency to purchase items similar to ritual. So instead of tribute, you're using, like in this example, lesser black scythe artifacts. But the catch is, unlike ritual, you can decide to haggle. So you can decide to offer him more or less, or if you want to offer him full price, you're guaranteed to get the item, but the cheaper you go, the more chance he has to reject you and potentially take the item off the shelf. So essentially it's ritual with a twist, but it's tradable ritual with a twist. So you can buy the shop refreshes, you can buy the currency to buy from him, or from other players, and it is also available from the expeditions themselves. So I personally really do enjoy the ritual style kind of shop. I really did kind of enjoy kind of shopping around, spending my tribute, and this, in my opinion, is a much better implementation of it. I can do all my mapping I want, stack up all of this currency, and then I can spend some time with this small dude, and I can check out the shop, roll all of my currency down, and maybe pick up some exalts, or maybe even get lucky and get a mirror shot or something like that. It's very exciting to kind of just roll the dice like that. I really enjoy it personally, and the ability to haggle and get a good deal and kind of like see how far you can push it is even more interesting. And I think this is going to be a really good source of early game currency for a lot of players, and it will probably be the most value focused kind of vendor overall outside of the endgame meta kind of stuff, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I think this is probably the most powerful vendor for your average player, and I think focusing on the currency that this guy is going to give you is probably ideal, because overall he offers pure currency in the form of like stacks of 10 fusings. I imagine he's going to offer exalts, uniques, pretty much anything ritual has. I imagine this guy will have too, and that is quite a powerful mechanic overall. Next up, we have the crafting guy, the fat man. So this guy, in my opinion, is probably one of the most hard to gauge. Essentially, this guy is a version of Tiny's Trial from Betrayal with a little bit less options and more power. So the idea behind this guy is that you can pick a base, and purchase it, and then it'll come with modifiers, and you can continually modify that item infinitely until you're happy with it, just using in-game expedition currency. So you can continually, infinitely modify it using harvest level power crafts. Some of them are more powerful than harvest crafts, with the catch that you don't get to decide what modifier comes next, and you cannot continually re-roll what modifier is on offer. The only decision you have with this guy is whether you want to take his offer or not, and that is the limiting factor of this crafter. If you had the option to re-roll what he's offering you in terms of the crafting window, this would probably be one of the most powerful and interesting ways to craft in the game. But as it stands, you can see here we have a quiver. It's got, 16 decks, etc. But the thing he's offering us here is remove 2 modifiers with the lowest modifier levels. So lowest modifier levels, I have no idea what that means, but it does sound pretty deterministic to me. So you can pretty much guarantee what you're looking at will change in a fairly deterministic way. There's obviously non-deterministic crafts as well, but I think that this will be a pretty interesting thing to engage with. My only question is that if, for example, you roll 30 of the random kind of upgrades here, and then you compare that to rolling 30 chaos, which one would actually come out with the better item? Is this going to be more effective than chaos spamming? Is it going to be more effective than fossil spamming? We just simply don't know. And overall, I'd like to think that it would be more powerful than those because, you're using a special league-based currency. You don't get to pick the base. You can't really influence the result at all without taking the item out and locking it all in. So overall, I think that this probably should be more powerful than stuff like fossil crafting, but it obviously will be less perfect. It's going to be very interesting, but I expect this will probably be very, very powerful early on in acquiring league start based gear. If you want to get a good wand, a good res belt, some res boots or something like that, movement speed, this will be probably particularly powerful. It'll probably severely plateau in the mid game, and then in the end game, you may see some niche cases where you're able to craft some really, really crazy items with him if the correct bases come up and if you kind of understand what he's offering you. I think it could be pretty interesting, but overall, I expect this is probably going to be more of an advanced player's mechanic outside of the league start situation, but I certainly will be trying to craft a few items with him early on, and then I am interested to see what happens with him later on. Alright, one of the limiting factors on him though, of course, will be the fact that we don't know if he can apply influence modifiers or influences all to his items. He'll never be able to create the most powerful items because you cannot use a Maven Orb on the items he's offering until after you get the item off of him. And of course, he probably won't offer double influence items either, which again are some of the most powerful in the game. So that severely limits the scope of what he's able to craft in terms of the ultimate endgame, but he may be able to craft decent items, and who knows, there may actually be some sort of an outcome that allows him to slam Shaper Influence onto a base or something like that, or maybe in the really, really high item levels in endgame, he does offer Shaper, Elder, Conqueror bases and all sorts of stuff like that. It all remains to be seen, but overall, I think he's going to be strong very, very early on, reasonably powerful in the endgame with some niche, probably very powerful cases, but it needs to see that influence to be really, really strong. Finally, for the basic vendors, we have a straight-up gambler. This NPC, the girl, essentially you can pay currency to straight up gamble. You can pick a base type from her inventory, and then you can go ahead and just grab it, and it has a chance to be anything. It can be blue, it can be unique, it can be rare. They've said that it can also be other base types like surprises. So my assumption is that it can probably be corrupted. It can probably be like, for example, anointed if it's an amulet, probably be enchanted. It can probably be synthesized, fractured, influenced, the works. I think that it can probably be pretty much anything in the game, making it a true gamble. And the catch is, it's not just a random chance orb, it's not just a random item off the floor. You have the option to check how much the item costs, and the greater the cost, the greater the item value will be. So for example, if your average item costs 25 coins, and there's one in there for 10,000, it's a leather belt, it's got a pretty damn good chance that it might be a headhunter, for example. So I think the value of this vendor is really going to come from, for example, how common the uniques really are from purchasing them. If you can go in there and deterministically purchase certain bases and get a really, really good return on getting really powerful uniques. So for example, picking all of the Void Battery bases, picking leather belts, picking the Vrislatha's coil base, all that kind of stuff like that. And it is actually a reasonable rate of return for uniques. or picking all the rings to make sure they're synthesized, or stuff like that. It could be quite exciting. It's all really going to depend on the tuning, but I think ultimately at the end of the day, the real money from this vendor and the real value and why people pursue it is probably going to be for high chase uniques, as well as synthesized bases for those synthesized implicits. If synthesized bases are not present from this vendor, I expect her value will be fairly low outside of, people trying to gamble for a headhunter or something like that. Okay, so each of these vendors actually did feature some form of ritual style loot window in which you can purchase items from. These can all be re-rolled using a new currency from the league. So you can see each of these icons up the top is a reroll token for one of the corresponding vendors. There's 4 different tokens for the 4 different vendors. We have left out one of the vendors, which we'll cover in a second here. But overall, there's 4 different reroll tokens, and each of the vendors also does have 4 different currency types associated with them. Each of the different currency types, I'm assuming, will have different rarities, and each of the different currency types will be used for different purchases within that vendor's kind of mechanic. So if you see and go and look at some of the material based on the crafting guy, he requires different crafting material, different currencies for his different crafts, and I imagine the rare ones will correspond to the particularly powerful crafts that are on offer. Okay, let's talk about the last NPC here. It is actually the leader. Where is he? I'm pretty sure this guy here. This guy is essentially the meta vendor. He sells stuff which can be offered to all the other vendors, but he also sells the new endgame aspirational content for this league. He sells the journals, the expedition journals. Logbooks, my mistake. He sells these to players, as well as potentially some other items that we haven't seen yet. Grinding Gear Games did not reveal his vendor window, but it's safe to assume that it will probably function similarly, as he does have a reroll token associated with him. So you will probably be able to buy, other currencies for the other vendors, as well as these logbooks. So logbooks. This is by far, in my opinion, the most exciting part of the league. Overall, I think that this is going to be the real draw. It's the equivalent of Blighted Maps. It's the equivalent of 5 Ways. It's the equivalent of Simulacrum. This is the big thing that everyone's working towards and the big exciting thing that everyone wants to do. It's the reason why you probably want to gear up your character this league, and it's the new hotness to really try out. We got stuff like this in the last league in the form of inscribed ultimatums, but I think that these are much more exciting and the potential for awesomeness is also much, much higher. So let's get into it and talk a little bit about how these might function in the endgame. Okay, so overall, you can buy these logbooks, and the logbooks themselves are in fact rollable, similar to a blueprint. They have modifiers on them, and they have anywhere between 1 to 3 different locations, it seems, that you can travel to. And these places that you can travel to will have different currency rewards, different bosses. For example, they might have a different boss that drops certain uniques on the drop table. So there is definitely going to be quite a few decisions to be made. Which currency do you want? Which boss do you want to have a chance at going at? Which modifiers do you favor? Here you can see there's increased explosive barrel radius. There's increased number of explosives. We don't know how many explosives you have access to, but if blighted maps are anything to go off, you can probably assume that we're going to get anywhere between 4 to 5 times as many explosives. And the whole catch is that it's a massive area which you can detonate, similar to the actual traditional expeditions, but on a map-wide scale. So if you take a look at the promotional material, when we check it out, you can kind of see that there is definitely a lot of juice to go around. Now, this is going to be a combination of pretty much all the mechanics currently in the Expedition League. There's going to be on a massive scale. So there's bosses, there's new environmental kind of caves that you can kind of crack open for additional loot. But the main thing I'm interested in here, and what everyone else I'm sure in the endgame is interested in, is how rewarding is it going to be and how can you scale those rewards. So if you recall correctly, we were talking about remnants. Remnants are these special shrines that when you detonate them, they add massive multipliers to the amount of loot from your expedition. Now, it is confirmed that these remnants are present in these massive endgame logbooks. So picture a world where there's 30 remnants and you get 25 explosive charges and you blow up 30 of the remnants, and let's just say hypothetically, all of them have 100% increased item quantity. That's 300% increased item quantity for monsters in the map, and you're going to get a slew of insane modifiers on your logbook that could rival the difficulty of something like 100% delirium in terms of lethality to your character as well as rewards. I'm not sure how accessible these logbooks are. I don't know how many of these remnants will be in the map, but we do know that the rewards that they yield and the increases to the loot are substantial. So if you can chain enough of these together, you could be looking at a very challenging, very rewarding content, which is gated behind having a powerful enough character and strategy to do it. And that is really where all of the Expedition League comes together. Making sure that you can maximize your logbook experience, get enough remnants, make sure you smash through it, maximize your rewards with your explosive charges. It's going to be very, very interesting making sure you maximize how many you have, the positioning, making sure you get all of the kind of loot aligned, making sure your sequence is correct if you need to detonate the remnants first and it's not retroactive. I think overall, the new league, mechanically, functionally, and gameplay-wise, looks incredibly exciting, with my only concern that the in-map ones might be a little bit slow for some players in the game. Alright, let's talk a little bit about rewards. So far now, we know that there is going to be pretty much, your standard affair in terms of currency. There's going to be new endgame bosses that you can encounter. These will be present on logbooks, saying that they will be 100% there, but they will also be chance-based. So it's kind of a hybrid approach, a little bit of ultimatum style and a little bit of, kind of like guaranteed style. But the thing I really want to talk about is the new defense they introduced into the game, and that is Ward. So Ward is a new type of defense which is present on new bases as well as uniques. So if you come down here, we can see it's a new base type. Overall, I think that the material that they've presented is a little bit confusing. You can see here that there is four different sets of bases of Ward items. It's unclear whether some of these are exclusive uniques. It's unclear whether these are just for different level brackets. We don't know entirely yet, but overall it seems that the mechanic is actually kind of on the weak side as it's currently being explained. This is the primary new player progression introduced. So if you want to compare it to something, this is our version of Cluster Jewels for Expedition. It's the new spicy mechanic that you can augment and amplify your characters with. So to kind of put it briefly, Ward is a new defensive effective hit pool kind of mechanic. Essentially, if you have 1,000 Ward and you get hit by any amount of damage, whether that be 1 or 1,000 exactly, that damage will be absorbed and the ward will be consumed. After it is consumed, it will be completely removed from your character and it will take 5 seconds, I believe, to regenerate. Now, if you have 1,000 ward and you take 1 damage, it will simply remove all 1,000 ward, even if it's just a 1 damage attack. So this mechanic heavily favors evasion, dodge, and block-based builds. Builds that can kind of mitigate damage completely without getting hit. It definitely does kind of push you in that direction with the way it's currently being explained. Now, overall, I don't know how powerful this is. It's probably more powerful than block and dodge than it is with evasion, because you have to understand that ward is an implicit on base types. Evasion is also an implicit on base types. So ward and evasion definitely are at odds and they do conflict somewhat. So overall, while ward sounds pretty interesting, the fact that it requires you to make a certain specific character and is not kind of universally useful because of the fact that you could just take one like little tiny hit and it gets removed, it probably won't be a super reliable way to kind of sustain the character. It's probably going to be a supplementary thing that you add on after your character is already pretty strong, meaning these base types probably won't see wide use unless they change the mechanic from how I understand it's been explained here. So overall, bit of a recap. So we have a brand new in-map mechanic that requires planning, has variation, and should be fairly rewarding with additional challenge at the player's disposal. We have some new kind of interesting ways to interact with vendors, with some spicy things for players to try, which is more than we normally get. We already have like kind of Legion level mechanic in our maps, and now we get the spicy vendors to try out. I think that they're just a bit of bonus fun. I don't know how much of an impact they will actually actually have on the end game. The most impactful one is probably the ritual vendor, to give players like a little bit of extra currency and be able to convert their expedition currency into currency that is usable to upgrade your gear. So overall, pretty good. And then we also have the new aspirational content in the form of the logbooks, which could be incredibly rewarding if they allow players to scale it based on those remnants in maps and introduce enough of them and they allow them to scale properly. So I am very, very excited about the prospects of the new Expedition League. Of course, there is a ton of other changes which are going to massively impact how the league is going to play out, but I thought it would be really good to spend some time on talking about the actual league mechanic itself. It does seem like another bit of a Legion-ish kind of league, so that does definitely get me fairly excited. It's going to have a little bit of thinking behind it as well, which I'm also pretty excited about, and I hope this, guys, has made you a little bit more excited as well. Not too sure about the ward items, but everything else seems really, really fun. Can't wait to dig into it. Definitely subscribe if you want more videos, and there'll be plenty more talks on what lies ahead. And if you're trying to figure out a build to play in the new league, this is the place to be. We will cover everything in detail. So with that said, guys, hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.